now instead of 30 years ago. We could have been there a lot earlier. The second thing I want you to understand about the history is the international failure, right? So in my book and in my classes, I teach about how the United Nations got together in 1992 and had a series of international meetings over and over and over again to try and get international agreement on cutting emissions. And this has been thoroughly torpedoed, mostly by the United States, but not only the United States, to the point where this process is completely bankrupt. Why? The president of the upcoming UN meeting this year is none other than the CEO of the Abu Dhabi Oil Corporation. Do you think the United Nations is going to give us internationally binding treaties to cut our emissions anytime soon? Anybody? No. Okay, so the takeaway from this is, like, let's forget about international action right now. It just isn't going to happen, particularly the United States doesn't want it to. And let's think we need to focus on national action right now. We need the United States in the game. All right, now what is needed? Well, we need to try and keep heating to 2 Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Right now we're at, remember what we're at, anybody? How much heating have we had? 1.2, okay? So we've got to keep heating to 2 Celsius. Now what will that actually entail, right? Without fancy fantasies or whatever. It actually entails cutting emissions about 5% per annum every year from 2022 onwards, 2022, 2023, 2024, this is the whole world, right? Now, to do that, if we started in the year 2000, we would have been here, we would only have needed 2% cuts per annum. Right now, we need 5% cuts per annum. If we wait another 10 years, we're going to need 7% cuts per annum. So there's this absolutely critical reductions of fossil fuel burning needs to happen right now. Okay. Now, you could say, well, what if we don't? What if we don't cut? When are we going to reach 2 Celsius? Right? So you're all about 15, 14, 15, 17, 18 years old. Think about this. You're looking at here. Okay? Well, if we don't actually cut fossil fuel use, and by the way, the Biden administration just approved Willow Project in Alaska. The Biden administration just opened 73 million acres of Gulf to new drilling. Okay? If we don't cut fossil extraction in a major way, here's where we will probably reach 2 Celsius. In about the 2040 to 2060 timeframe, i.e., let's say 2050, so less than 30 years from now. So some of you are going to be like 45 years old, okay? 43 years old, okay? Less than 30 years from now, we'll reach 2 Celsius. Well, what is it going to be like if we reach 2 Celsius? So here's Professor Rockström of the Potsdam Institute in Germany.
If you go past 2 degrees Celsius, then we will enter completely unknown terrain, a planet that is not even resembling our own planet, a place we haven't been in for the past 3 million years. So, we can today say scientifically, without any hesitation, that anything beyond 2 degrees is nothing but catastrophic. So of course, every 10th of a degree matters.
Okay, so there you have it. We need to keep heating beneath 2 Celsius. Now you could say, and maybe some of your parents will say if you explain this to them, what can we do? We're just small people here in a big world. Let's just make sure we have enough money. One of my privileged professor types told me when I said, aren't you worried about climate change? No. I said, but you've got a kid. He said, we'll move to higher ground. Okay? Well, maybe some people think they're going to move to higher ground, but this is not a good strategy. Okay, here's why. We are the biosphere and humanity. Like a little boat going down the river right now. We have the possibility of deflecting to the side. There's probably some amount of heating going to happen no matter what we do, but it doesn't have to be like levels that are going to make an unlivable world in the next few decades, okay? So we could deflect the little boat to the side. But if we hit the waterfall and go over, that's a tipping point. And it doesn't matter anymore what we do. It doesn't matter. Control it doesn't matter. Because that's going to accelerate heating so much that the thing runs away from us and it doesn't matter what humans do. Now, what are tipping points? Has anybody heard of tipping points before, by the way? Put your hands up, 1 or 2. All right, here's one tipping point. So permafrost core. In the frozen tundra of Alaska and Siberia, there is an enormous amount of organic matter buried in the ice. But as global heating occurs, that's starting to thaw. Okay? And as it thaws, it exposes that organic matter to the air, it will decompose and release methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas, and that will dramatically accelerate heating. Now, the question is, when is the permafrost thaw going to really accelerate its melting? Well, the IPCC, the scientific body, tells us that it's going to start around now, 1.1 Celsius heating, but maybe as late as 2.2, and the best estimate is 1.5 Celsius, right? So this is just think about this. Think about the urgency this entails. Like science is telling us, and we're probably going to reach about 1.5 Celsius about 10 years from now. So science is telling us if we don't leave fossil fuels in the ground and dramatically cut our emissions very soon, we risk a major tipping point like an acceleration of permafrost thaw about 10 years from now, which will accelerate heating dramatically beyond our control. I mean, this should be headline news. This should be in the New York Times. This should be in the LA Times. This should be not about what some celebrity ate for lunch on CNN, but this should be the news. Unfortunately, it isn't. Okay? So, what do we need to do? We need a social tipping point before the physical tipping point. We need way more members of society to actually get involved and wake the fuck up, okay? And pay attention to this so that we can pull the social tipping point before the physical tipping point. All right. Now, what do I mean by social mobilization? So social mobilization is you all and your families and the wider population of California waking up. And there are different ways to wake up. So let me show you this. Here's the United States population. Only 57% of US adults believe that climate change is caused by humans. I mean, why is that so low? Anybody? Why would that be? Yeah. Okay, misinformation is basically what you're saying, yes. So there's been a systematic campaign of misinformation, particularly by the fossil fuel companies, particularly in the United States. I mean, it's like this in Australia, like this in Canada to some extent. 57% is like incredible. Now, those who accept the human cause, some accept the impacts. Yep, I know it's a human cause, probably many of your parents, and it's like, yep, climate change is here, yep, it's going to be bad, I'm worried about it. But there's a whole bunch of people who do not accept the human cause. And this is sort of your Wall Street Journal reader type, right? Sort of educated Republicans. Yes, they know there's climate change. Yes, they know it's human cause. Yes, they believe it's caused by burning fossil fuels. But you know what? Yeah, so we'll deal with it. We're a rich country. We'll make sure we have enough money. Well, you know what? Economists say nothing to worry about. We'll be okay. This kind of stuff, impact denial, very common. Now, those who accept the human cause and those who accept the impacts, then the question is, you may be skeptical about responding. What can I do? I'm just one person. What about China, right? So this is called overcoming epistemic skepticism. Epistemic means knowledge, right? So the first point of social mobilization is to help. How many of you have family members who are skeptical about climate change? Many, okay? So, all right. Now, epistemic skepticism, skepticism about the climate change is a mix of different things, okay? So on the y-axis here, I'm showing you the consensus. The consensus of scientists is 100%. Any scientist who know anything about this now 100% agree that there's a human cause of global warming. But if you go to people, for example, the most liberal Americans, who say, do you believe that there's a consensus of scientists? Only 80% think that there is, okay? Why only 80% think there is? Presumably because there's an information deficit or misinformation, okay? Even amongst liberals in America. If you go to the most conservative Americans and you say, do you believe that there's a consensus of scientists? Only 30% think there is, okay? And that's a mix of information deficit, misinformation, and cultural bias. Cultural bias being worldviews, values, ideologies, not wanting government interference, being part of a Republican Party that's a climatized party, so forth and so on. So there are a number of things you can do, even as a student, right? With your skeptical uncle in the Central Valley, that climate change is a hoax made up by the Democrats, right? There's a number of things you can do. This is kind of a long story. I don't want to tell you too much about it. But one thing you can do is you can do some jiu-jitsu maneuvers with your uncle in the Central Valley, okay? What do I mean by jiu-jitsu? Well, you could recognize that the surface attitudes that come out of his mouth, you know, he may be skeptical about vaccines, he's skeptical about climate change, the things he says, mostly you're not going to get very far at confronting him with facts and trying to dispute his surface attitudes. But what you could realize is that his surface attitudes reflect some underlying attitude roots. He's got this idea that government interference is bad. He's got this idea that we should all be individuals. He's got all sorts of ideas of conspiracy thinking or vested interests. Well, you could make some headway with your uncle on the attitude roots, and you may discover that the surface attitudes shift. Okay? Second thing I want to point out here is that, you know, a lot of people are going to support climate policy. Some of your parents may be conservative, and you're not going to get very far with them trying to talk to them about the human cause of heating or even climate change. But your parents are concerned about air pollution, in East County in particular. They're concerned about jobs. They're concerned about national security. There are ways of getting support from conservative people for climate policy, even without changing their beliefs on climate change. Here's an example. In the state of Colorado, the governor of Colorado was a Republican who brought a clean electricity standard to the state, i.e. creating electricity from renewables, because the ranchers wanted to have wind turbines on their land so they could profit from the wind. Now those ranchers are not like climate change loving people, okay? So there's a nice example of how you can get good policies without changing people's beliefs. So what can you do? Be a communicator, right? Try and make some headway with your family members. Now, epistemic skepticism is also, as the student front said, partly a function of misinformation, okay? Where does the misinformation come from? It comes from the fossil fuel industry and related industries that have deliberately tried to confuse people about this problem for a long time. Now, the way they used to do that up until about 5-10 years ago was to say, scientists disagree, it's controversial, they try and hit the consensus or hit the human cause. And here's now how this campaign has started changing shape.
Many climate experts agree that carbon capture and storage is crucial to reducing emissions to combat climate change. That's why ExxonMobil is deploying this technology. It can remove more than 90% of CO2 emissions from carbon-intensive industries and help lower the carbon footprint of many everyday things. From the roads we drive on to the devices we rely on. It's one of the ways ExxonMobil is advancing climate solutions.
Reactions? Yeah?
None of that made sense.
Any other reaction? Is convincing? You're like, we can all go back to sleep now. It's okay, they got it, right? What's to worry about? American corporations are on the case. Ingenuity will win. Anybody else? Any reaction? Okay. Well, so the issue is that what they're talking about is carbon capture from smokestacks. So what ExxonMobil wants to do and oil companies want to do, having, by the way, made $400 billion of profits last year, what they want to do is keep extracting fossil fuels from the ground. Absolutely, okay? And so what they're doing here is they're saying, we're going to be part of the climate solution now. And that means we're going to take, apparatus and fit it on the smokestacks so that we'll keep burning fossils, keep extracting fossil fuels, keep burning them, and try and capture the carbon dioxide from the smokestack and bury it underground. Now this is like a ridiculous thing to do because wind and solar is so cheap already, it's basically getting this out anyway, and like at a colossal expense. And then to grab the carbon dioxide, bury it underground, hasn't even been proven you can do that. This is all just designed as a way to prolong their business model. But it's very convincing. People need to know stuff, right? So this is what you need to do here, is you need to spot the new propaganda. This is part of the reason why people are staying asleep, is because the companies are trying to persuade everybody that they got this in hand. Now, the next topic I'm going to switch to here is overcoming response skepticism. So what to do, why to do it, and how to do it. Now, you've accepted the human cause. You've accepted and understood that the impacts, and I think a lot of young people are worried about this, even if they don't know that much, right? And then you're like, I'm going to act. And in fact, the fact that you're here is acting to some extent. The fact that Abby and Laura, they brought me here is a form of overcoming response skepticism. So, okay, you've accepted that, you need to respond. Now, your response could be what I call here a little personal action, right? And I don't want to ding this, it's important. Looking at to some extent, making some personal changes. Now, if these are your parents, they can make sure that if they're going to buy a new car, it's an EV, they can put solar panels on their roof, they can electrify the home, they can replace if they have the means, right? They can replace the gas range with electric, they can get rid of the water heat and make electric, completely electrify your house and get off the gas. People can make changes to their diet. Meat eating is a big part of it, only because there's so many emissions from agriculture. But what really matters is moving beyond personal action to collective action, okay? And so collective action is doing things as a group. Now that could be activism, which is a little bit more shouty sometimes, or being part of a group is a little bit more shouty and sort of confronting power from the outside usually, or being an advocate, which is working inside the institution, like Abby and Lorelei here, really are advocates for climate action inside the school, working with the school to actually bring consciousness changes, kind of being an advocate. Okay? Now, before you can start being an activist or advocate or saying, you know what, I'm going to get involved in climate action, you need to have some sense in your mind about what is it you're asking for. And that's where justice principles come in. You've got to keep a few things in mind here, right? Those who emit the least will suffer the most. Look at the relative emissions of North America to South America or Europe compared to Africa, right? But justice principles are really important in thinking through solution talk. What are we actually going to do about this? Okay? Some people say, oh, let's just do carbon taxes. Okay, well, the problem with carbon taxes is it basically punishes people, particularly low-income people, so you need to bring justice in. There's a form of carbon taxes that may be acceptable if you put a tax on carbon and then rebate some of that to low-income families. Mining for renewables, we're going to need a huge transition to get off fossil fuels and shift to renewable energy. That's going to involve new mining. Okay, it's going to involve new forms of damage. So, for example, Theorio Frankos has written very cogently and clearly about this. The amount of damage from new renewables and lithium mining and cobalt, while bad, is something like 500 or 1,000 times less than fossil fuel extraction. There's ways of doing recycling and getting around that. So you keep justice principles in mind. All right, now, what do we need to do? We can achieve a technical, political, and social framework for a near total reliance on renewables and electrification. We need to basically stop with fossil fuels in the United States. We need to shift to electrification almost everything. Okay? That requires knowing some stuff, right? Well, how much land surface is it going to take? About 1%. What are you going to do with the fact that the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow? Intermittency. You're going to have storage. You're going to have electric grids. What is it going to cost? About $8 trillion until 2050. Okay, that sounds like a lot. The United States military budget is $1 trillion per year, by the way. We pumped $4 trillion into the economy over 18 months during the pandemic. This country doesn't have a shortage of money. It's a question of how it's used. Okay? Jobs. What's it going to? It's going to make a lot of jobs. So you need to kind of know some facts about, is it even possible for us to get off the fossil fuels? It is. Okay? And this is one of the most hopeful figures that the IPCC, the body of scientists that internationally produces a consensus on this, one of the most hopeful figures ever produced. So what you see here on this axis is the amount of savings we could get of greenhouse gases. Now, bear in mind, the world is emitting about 40 gigatons, 40 billion tons. It's hard to imagine that when you think about those New York balloons, but just like think it's a lot more than that, right? 40 billion a year. Now, with wind energy and solar energy, blue means the cost is actually cheaper now than the standard thing that's been done. If you just ramped up wind energy and solar energy and you add up those blue bars, you get about 5 gigatons, so 5 out of 40. So 1/8 of all our emissions in the world could basically be erased right now if we just made a big shift to wind and solar right now. Okay? We could run our eyes down here to buildings. If we in San Diego Unified, for example, and the city of San Diego and the UK, if we actually properly insulate buildings and reduce wastage of building heat, like you saw that in New York, 75% of that CO2 from buildings, we could basically get about another 4 gigatons. Okay? And this is transportation. If we electrify public transit, buses, and most personal vehicles, in the time frame we have now, with the cost being where it is, we add this all up, we're about 8 or 9 gigatons. So about a quarter of all the world's emissions right now, at a reasonable cost, can actually be dealt with if we wanted to. And this is a hopeful figure about what we need to do. The problem is, the atmosphere doesn't care about renewable energy. Okay? It cares about leaving fossil fuels in the ground. And the fundamental problem we have, including in California, right? We're adding more renewables in the grid. We've got solar panels here on your school parking lot, which is great. Is the renewable energy is additional to instead of replacing fossil fuels, right? All projections basically say as renewables ramp up to 2050, fossil extraction will continue. So what do we need to do? We need to stop all new fossil fuel infrastructure. We need to retire most existing fossil infrastructure. We need to reduce our consumption, and we need to contest fossil fuel interests everywhere. And none of this is going to happen without a large social mobilization. Okay, so important caveat here. Individual behavior is a good thing, but it's not enough unless it's done as part of collective action. Okay? Riding a bicycle is good, but it's minuscule compared to that huge diesel chugging truck next to you. If you ride your bicycle and you get involved with ST Bike Coalition and you go to bat for good policies on bike lanes like happened in North Park and the metro area right now, and the city responds by putting in bike lanes, you're actually cutting emissions. It's always like this, right? Which bank are your parents using? Are they using Bank of America, Citi, JP Morgan Chase, or Wells Fargo? Very likely they are. Those banks have financed climate chaos to the tune of $4 trillion over the last 5 years. There would be no extraction of fossil fuels if these banks didn't support it. Okay? So your parents could shift out of the banks to a credit union. But that's going to be a tiny thing. But if their friends do it, if their family do it, if it spreads as consciously, 10,000 people do it, the banks will stop financing the climate crisis. So individual action needs to be coupled with collective action done as a group. This is not about beach cleanups and plastic recycling. This is about leaving fossil fuels on the ground. In fact, focusing on plastic recycling and beach cleanups, I think, is quite a nice deliberate strategy to actually keep everybody asleep. Okay, so I'm a psychologist, and one of the things I do is try and understand what is it about Lorelei and Abby that make them jump up and try and make change in the world, and other people aren't doing it. There's a bunch of psychological factors that need to sort of understand this. And one part about it is what's called theory of change. You have to believe that local change is the critical foundation for climate. You have to think, little me, I can get involved here in San Diego with a small group of people, and it matters. Okay, this is one of the most conniving and nasty politicians ever, true fact, okay? Certainly not an environmentalist. And he brought the furthest ranging environmental legislation ever in the 1970s. Why? Because town by town, city by city, up and down this country, people got pollution. And it got so serious that it started hurting corporate interests. And so the corporate interests went to the Nixon administration like, y'all better bring some standards. And that's where the legislation came from. Like, there's lots of good examples of this. The suffragette movement for women's rights. Did you know that up until 1975 in the United States, a woman was officially the property of her husband? Did you know that? That's not long ago in 1975. Like, that shift, this change dramatically started with small groups of people advocating up and down. Okay? Same-sex marriage, 2015, Supreme Court, boom, law of the land. Started bit by bit, conversation by conversation through the 1990s and onwards. So we have lots of good examples of local change leading to national change. Now you can say here, these are my climate examples. Let me just point out, mixed picture on the governor, by the way. But one thing he's done is bring an executive order on EVs, okay? All New York is following, okay? Youth movement in the Bronx in 2018 helped elect AOC. A small group of climate activists, mostly high school students like you, helped elect AOC in the Bronx. They go to Congress, and these youth turn up in the halls of Congress and say, we want climate. It gets reflected in Senator Sanders' plan, it gets reflected in the Biden administration's Build Back Better, a massively ambitious plan for climate action that gets whittled down to the Inflation Reduction Act, but this is climate policy that matters. So here's a clear example of individual people working in small groups that basically help make national policy. Why would we be skeptical about this? This is how it's always worked. All right, well, I'm near the end. This is the group I work with at UCSD. The UCSD Green New Deal, mostly student run. We have kicked the butt of the UC system. These 10 campuses are emitting 1 million tons a year of carbon dioxide burning fossil gas. We have a power plant at UCSD. Now, there's still a power plant at UCSD and UCLA and everywhere else. They haven't stopped with that. But we've basically shifted the conversation and making plans on how to start electrifying, okay? Here are some of our members castigating the highest officials in the UC system. This is the CFO, operating budget $40 billion per year, listening to them, okay? Here are the students outside the Price Center at UCSD. Remember that Chase is one of the biggest culprits.
We need you to move the money. Hey, Chase, this ain't funny. We need you to move the money.
Chase Bank gone from UCSD Price Center. All right, gone. All right, this is what you can do. Now, we need strong policies in California, and we don't have them. We have some climate policy, we have some stuff coming out of the legislature, we have some stuff coming from Newsom. It's nothing like what we need. And so we need to step it up. And to some extent, this is very much about the number of people, whether it's our city council or it's amazing legislation by Lena Gonzalez in Sacramento. Most of it's getting killed, most of it's getting subverted, it's not going through. So our elected officials can do all sorts of things. They can create building electrification, transport electrification, they can create increased rooftop solar, they can fix our electric grid, they can change agriculture. Your parents can change your house if they have the means. And if they don't have the means to electrify your house, they should be advocating for a policy in California so we have the means to do that. We can create a state bond and every household could get $40,000 low interest loan and everyone could electrify. Like we can do this. Okay? Your parents can shift their banking, they can focus on the city and the state. Teachers, you can focus on your students and educating them regardless of whether it's in curriculum or not, it should be. You can influence your college, you can influence your district. Good things happening in San Diego Unified School District. We're going to get electrification, but with some pushing from below. And students, you can educate the people around you, and you can mobilize and push adults, higher ups, parents, and teachers to do better. Find your front lines. Here are some students from my class making comments in City Council. Here are students, high school students, Youth versus Oil, pushing the government to stop drilling and fracking, which is still doing. And whether you're introverted or extroverted doesn't matter. There's a space for everybody. Research, writing, designing, graphic art, social media, teaching, organizing, leading, inspiring, protesting, disrupting. You can do all of those things, or any of them, okay? And it's fun. It's fun to work with people together. It's a great antidote to our fragmented society. So local collective action works, but it must be strengthened. Here is our problem. Californians, wake up, okay? It doesn't matter whether this dude is a big guy or not. He's probably kind of okay. That's not the point. He's a highly ambitious politician, and he's going to do what the forces pushing on him want him to do. Okay. Right now, the fossil fuel industry is winning. Okay. The investor-owned utilities are winning, and some powerful unions. So our job is to do this. Okay. And we better do this quickly, because we're going to reach a tipping point in about 10 years, and we're going to break through 2 Celsius in about 30 years. And the world will return to a state it hasn't been in for 3 million years, where we will not have, I have young children, we will not have a well-organized society. Okay? So, summary, let's bring the social tipping point before the physical tipping point. Climate breakdown is already happening and could escalate. A shift to near total reliance on renewables, electrification, most things are technically possible. We cannot leave this to decision makers. You cannot sit around expecting electeds to deal with this. They're not going to do so. You can push locally and from below. It always works. This is how social change is made. Too few are engaged. High school students and teachers are in an excellent position to pull a large lever in society, and we are in an excellent position in California to push the way the nation goes. Thanks for your attention. So now what's going to happen is Abby and Laura are going to come up and ask me a few questions, and we're going to have about 5 minutes left.
Thank you all so much for being great listeners. My first question is, why isn't there any major climate policy in California?
So there is some climate policy. There's SB 100 state law that puts more renewables in the grid, like 60% by 2030. The executive order on EVs, but we don't have strong enough climate policy that really makes a difference. For example, the state, the scoping plan, the California Air Resources Board, everything is like 2045, everything is too little, everything is too slow, everything is too far away. I think the reason is that, so a couple of reasons. One is like most of the public's not paying attention and doesn't care and is not engaged. People, if you ask the people in polling, Californians say, I'm worried about climate change. But yeah, if you go to city council and look at our electeds, there's like 5 people in the room. So there isn't a wide social mobilization, A. B, the fossil fuel interests are incredibly powerful. The entrenched power of oil and gas in California and investor-owned utilities and the grip of politicians is just fundamentally strong. And so even when good legislation comes up in Sacramento, it gets killed by the Democrats.
Thank you.
And what are some actual steps we as high schoolers can take to combat the climate crisis?
So I touched on that a little bit. I mean, I think high school is, you're in a position to make some shifts in your school. Your school's doing good things. You're in a position to shift your parents, to shift the home. Yeah, I mean, the banking that your parents use, are your houses running on gas? You know, there's your city officials, so I think your front lines, city officials, parents, school, and maybe to some extent state policy getting involved. You could join groups like Youth for Climate, San Diego's 50, Sunrise Movement, or you could just start something yourself, or you could just be a good climate crisis communicator without even joining a group at all.
Thank you. Now we will open it up for questions from parents.
Okay, great. Yes, there's a question at the back.
What names are we supposed to use since almost all the ones that you listed are the main ones that we all know, and you said they're all bad, so.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Yeah, so it's a question about banking. So City of Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Chase are really bad finances and cost attraction. But there's a lot of alternatives. The credit unions, for example. So we have a bunch of credit unions, we have Gulf Coast Credit Union. The credit unions in San Diego and California have very little exposure to the hospital industry. So that's one answer. Being aware of it and doing some research on it, looking into it, but credit unions are an alternative. Yes?
How can we go full electric if America's electrical grid is actually on the decline and unstable?
Is in a declining state.
No, it's one, it's declining, and two, it's unstable. So
It's unstable, yes. How can we go electric? Basically, how can we go electric if the grid is not good enough? It's a great question. So, I mean, within California, we can certainly add more renewables to the grid all the time and dealing with that. There's something to connect Oregon and so forth. But for the United States to really do this right, for us to be able to run the country on renewables overnight as well, right? It's going to require a redone electric grid that interconnects between different states, like for example, solar and wind from the south and the Midwest up to the northeast of winter, things like that. It's going to require serious federal investment to fix the electric grid. There's no way of getting around that, and we don't have that. That's the kind of policy we're going to need as well. Yeah.
follow-up question, why don't we just go nuclear? It is the closest thing we have.
Why don't we just go
between
nuclear?
energy.
Okay, good question. So, my view is that the nuclear that we have, we probably should keep running. Okay, we don't have a lot of nuclear, we have some. But building new nuclear takes on average 9 to 18 years with a mean of about 12 to build a new nuclear plant. Just think about the time scale we're talking about, right? We don't have time for 12 years, okay? Second, it costs something like 11 to 23 times as much as taking that equivalent amount of money and just putting it into scale solar right now. So then you have all the waste. So it's like building new nuclear is such an enormously slow and expensive undertaking relative to alternatives. It doesn't make sense. But we do need to have storage overnight. That's the issue. Great questions. Yes, at the back.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
First one, with mass industrialization, how do we have space building wind plants and all of that?
Sorry, with what? With that?
With mass industrialization, how do we have like space to build wind plants and all of that?
What do you mean mass industrialization?
So industrialization, since like big business and all of that are trying to industrialize all of the US.
Okay.
Where do we have space?
Where do we have space? Okay, yes. So just to be clear on this, San Diego. Just to answer that question. So in San Diego County alone, if you just take the rooftops, the warehouses, the housing, the residential, and the parking lots, and you just add all of that up in San Diego County alone, there's 20 gigawatts of rooftop solar potential. Now, to put that in context for you, our entire California electric grid output right now is 40 gigawatts. So there's enormous potential on rooftop, just in San Diego County alone. The entire amount of US oil surface covered by fossil fuel operations is about 1.5 to 2% of the entire land surface taken over by fossil extraction. We could refocus that land for women. So anyway, thank you so much for your attention.
do that though, instead of cafeteria and then, yeah, if you want. I'll leave.
I don't know. I mean, you told me that presentation is really was pushed to the right way and right level. It's hard to know. I think a lot of videos. I thought the videos were going to keep engaged. Oh, yeah. I mean, leaving that out. No. Right. I see the little partisan. Although I believe on the Democrats at the end. And I swore I didn't. Maybe that wasn't so bad. Kind of worked people out.
Well, thank you so much.